Mackenna. So we're going to get right into this. I gave this presentation, I think, at the end of January to the WFFA. And so that's why I put this together and figured it would be great to share this with the public outside of that group. If you're with WFFA, there might be some new information in the Q&A, but most of this is going to be the same. So to review, 2021 was dry. From March to August, the Pacific Northwest saw below average rainfall. Clark County was in drought conditions from April through October, and Clark County reached severe drought conditions in May and remained there until September. Dry conditions are normal in the summer here, as we should all see and know, but not to this extent. The drought that we were seeing, especially that early in spring, is not the usual conditions. On this slide here, we've got some maps of the drought conditions that we saw last year. So this first one up here to the left corner, this one right here, is back in April. So in spring, April 2021, this yellow means abnormally dry. Weren't quite in drought in Clark County, but we were abnormally dry. The following map to the right is June of 2021, and by June, near end of June, we were orange, which is severe drought. So by June, we were in a severe drought, and as you can see, a lot of the surrounding areas were also in some condition of drought. By August, we were still in severe drought, and October, we had gone down to moderate drought, and these are all in comparison to regular drought conditions. So by October, where last year we started seeing rains pretty heavily in September and through October, we were still in moderate drought conditions even by near the end of October. And then to review, in late June, the Pacific Northwest got stuck in a heat dome that resulted in extremely high temperatures for several days. Areas of Clark County reached temperatures of 116 degrees Fahrenheit. So that is a temperature that has never been recorded here before. Since we've been taking temperatures, has never reached 116 degrees, hasn't reached anything close to 116 degrees here. And what climate scientists are calling it, they're calling it a 1 in 1,000 year event. So we see this happening again within our lifetimes, we are in trouble. So impacts. So these are the things that, this is the first topic we're going to talk about what we've seen, effects of the heat dome mixed with that drought on trees. The main thing that everybody probably could tell is tree scorch. So the reddening of the needles on the trees. We're going to talk about a few things listed here about the tree scorch. We'll get into that in the next slides. So first thing, tree scorch on new growth and second year growth. We were seeing a lot of tree scorch on the new growth that you can see there in that left picture, that red color of the needles. But also we're seeing it in second year growth, where the new growth was that bright green color and fine, and second year growth was either yellow or red, as you can see in the second picture. So it kind of skipped that first year growth. The leading theory on why the second year growth has to do with Swiss needle cast. So there's a fungal pathogen that causes Swiss needle cast out near the coast. It's not very common here in Clark County, but that pathogen still exists on our trees. It just doesn't typically affect our trees. And if it does affect it, it doesn't affect them as severely as you see out towards the coast. So we're thinking that the pathogen was on that second year growth, but not on this new growth that had just come out. So that's why the older second, third year growth got affected, but the new year growth didn't. That's a theory though. We don't know for sure that's what's going on. And Natalie's going to post the fungal pathogen in the chat, just so that you guys, I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it, but if anybody's interested, they can look it up.
I put that in the chat, and Mackenna, if you want to pause for a second and
Yeah.
you can do your first poll of the night.
All right. There we go. All right, then we also are seeing scorch in certain areas on trees. So limbs of trees facing the south or west saw more signs of scorch. Appears that limbs facing the sun at the hottest parts of the day had the largest chance for damage. So as you can see in this picture here, kind of facing towards the sun, hot part of the day, the needles got scorched, but the other sides of the tree fared pretty well. And then species. So almost every native tree and a lot of non-native trees saw some sign of damage. 2 species in the Pacific North have seen increased mortality and health issues in relation to this heat event, but also just in relation to droughts becoming a little more severe every year and having hotter temperatures. The 2 trees locally that probably had the most sign of scorch, which like severe scorch, was actually a western red cedar, which I'm sure plenty of people who have those trees on their property have seen that, and the western hemlock. Trees that have been having issues with climate are western red cedar and big leaf maple, though I don't think that big leaf maple got too badly scorched, though definitely a bunch of deciduous trees got scorched. The Douglas fir did get a lot of scorch, but for the most part, it fared well through that. It wasn't severe enough to cause mortality, though some Douglas fir trees have been scorched. Additionally to that, trees most likely planted in the environment that doesn't really fit their typical habitat also saw scorch. So a lot of noble fir and other AB species that shouldn't have been planted down as in the valley got scorched. Additionally, a lot of pines got scorched, like the person in the chat was saying about their white pine. A lot of ponderosa and lodgepole pine were also scorched, most likely because they were most likely not the right seed source for this area. But lots of different trees, a lot of different trees had that sign of scorch on it. Coastal areas. So the coast got the brunt of the tree scorch, with whole stands of mature trees turning red on their needles. You look out on this picture here, you can see that whole hilltop of just red trees. I don't know if anybody else has driven out to the coast, but when I drove out right after the heat event, and it was pretty shocking seeing the stands of trees that were red topped, whereas here it wasn't quite as drastic on the whole stand level of scorch. And so then Willamette Valley and lowlands, we got scorched, as well as in the foothills, but not quite as bad as the coast. Seemed to be pretty localized to field edges or in fields that had that exposure to the sun, whereas the whole stand, very few whole stands had signs of tree scorch throughout. And then Clark County, all these pictures here are of Clark County trees. Some of them don't show up quite as well, but here I believe that's a cedar tree that's been thinning and scorched and most likely dead or dying. These pictures were all taken in February, so this is well after the event and after the winter where it maybe had a chance to pop back. Here's some trees that got thinning canopies. Here's another tree that's thinning out. This right here, you can't really see it very well, but this is a pine tree, either a lodgepole or a ponderosa, that pretty much all of its needles are scorched. This here is a thinning tree. These are some dead trees here. Don't know. And all of these pictures, I don't know for a fact that they looked fine before or if they were already ill looking. But yeah, quite a few sad looking trees across our county from all corners of the county. I will say that definitely lower elevations got it worse. As you go up higher into the higher elevations, gets a little better. Less signs of scorch, less damage. And other impacts. So other impacts in addition or potentially in addition to the scorch is needle drop. So needle drop on trees was observed at higher rates, even in areas with no observable scorch. So even within tree stands, trees that you didn't see any red needles on it, it was observed after the heat dome event, trees having higher loss of needles, especially on the ground. There was more needles on the ground than what's typically expected for needle drop from fir trees and pine trees. This information here is on diameter growth after the 21 heat event. This information comes from the U.S. Forest Service Pacific Northwest Research Station. They are doing research on seed zones. So what we've got here is these first two places on the left are nurseries or like area orchards based out of Southern Oregon. Jammer is a coastal place in Washington, and Buckhorn is Western Washington. It's a little more inland. I believe it's kind of close to Wahkiakum, Cowlitz County area. And what you got across the top here is the different seed sources that they've been doing their diameter experiments with, or measurements. And this is all the measurements that they've seen, mean growth since midsummer. So growth since after the 2020 heat event. This is in Oregon, this is Washington, and this is Washington coast. But really what matters is looking at the mean here. We've got these two southern places, their mean growth were 0.03 and 0.1, and the coast place had 0.44, and Buckhorn, the more mid-Washington area, had 0.2. So it seemed like Southern Oregon's growth was less than maybe the coast but this Buckhorn inland Washington area, just from this information. This isn't enough information to make a conclusion, but just seeing that information, it makes you wonder what's going on in Southern Oregon versus the coast, especially since it seemed like the coast got the most scorch. This here is a graph of trees from Southern Oregon. This is from 2020, so for drought, for the heat dome. And this is regular growth for a Douglas fir tree in Southern Oregon. As you can see, it's growing. Right here, this blue line is the heat event. That's June, end of June 29th, I believe. And still growing after June 29th. There's a little bit of a slowdown, but for the most part, still growing pretty straight through the summer there. Go look at the next one. That blue line, once again, is the heat dome. Growing, and then hits that heat dome and actually shrinks down, and then slow growth. So from beginning where it kind of slows down, 2021 with that heat dome, slow growth almost stopped and was much slower in comparison to what it was doing beforehand, or in comparison to 2020. Now, impacts on mortality. So most likely, yes, near the coast, there's definitely been trees dying out on the coast. Definitely evidence of mortality in trees in open spaces. So in fields, ones that had high exposure to the sun. Deciduous trees so far are looking pretty good. So hasn't been that much mortality in deciduous trees, those trees with leaves. Locally, higher elevation young plantations saw no increased mortality. So kind of above 1,500 feet, mortality was about normal for what you'd see in a young planted stand. And then in the valley of Clark County, it is obvious that some trees along roadways and in fields are dying. However, it is unclear if there are any signs of this in stands of trees. So along the edge, the ones that got that brute sunlight, there are some trees dying around Clark County, especially cedars and non-native trees that maybe shouldn't have been planted here in the first place, but stands, there's not as much evidence of that.
Mackenna, do you want to take another pause and have your second poll go?
Yep, let's do it.
I'll launch it now.
So we're gonna ask you what kind of mortality you guys were seeing on your property.
Yep, so the questions are you in Clark County? And did you see increased tree mortality on your property or land that you manage? Looks like we have a lot of Clark County people joining us tonight.
Good. This is geared towards them. But there's information from around.
Leave it open for a bit longer. All right. Yeah, I'll share the results now. It looks like we have either quite a few people joining us from Clark County or in the Pacific Northwest. And then it also looks like a lot of people's trees are still alive so far. So that's good.
That's
news.
great.
Yeah. All right. I'll hand it over to you again.
All right. All right, so conditions now, what we're seeing now. So Clark County is no longer in drought. Yay. We've got here on the right, we've got February. I think February is actually probably the first month, might have been January, that we no longer were in drier conditions. So we're that little white guy right here. No drought. Looked like in February, just across the river, Multnomah County and some other areas, we're still in a dry period. So even after all those rain, there's still drier conditions than usual in February. Now well, this is from May 17th, so a couple weeks ago or a week ago, we're not in drought. And look at put all this area here, Western Washington, Northwest Oregon, not in drought. Yay, we're doing it. We're getting the rain. It's been raining a whole lot this spring, so that's awesome. Rest of the state, besides maybe the Idaho Panhandle and the Oregon, they're not looking so good. It's like we've been hogging all the rain this season, looks like. But anyways, 2021 slightly below average precipitation. So even with all that dryness that we saw last year, we got a pretty good wet September, and last few months of the year, we got a whole bunch of storms that rolled through that brought a bunch of moisture. So we only ended up being slightly below average for precipitation for the year in total. And then 2022, the spring's been wet, which is good. And then the deciduous trees are looking good. I've been waiting to see if with the leaves coming out, how they did. So it seems that all those trees that lost their leaves were able to, at least most of them were able to grow leaves this following year. So maybe that helps, being able to drop your leaves as part of your biological process. And looking forward, it can take years to know the full effects of a drought. So we've got this information now. We can see, we can observe what the trees are doing. We can measure, their growth. We can see if they died or not. But really, it can take a long time to really know what the effect of a drought is, especially with cumulative, if we've had years of drought, or if we get more drought years or more heat spells like that, the one we saw, or just similar heat waves that we see somewhat frequently now in summertime. Won't really know fully what's going to happen to all of our trees until you get a couple years out from an event like that. 2022 forecast looks pretty good so far. There doesn't, at least for us, at least for Clark County and kind of the surrounding area, it's supposed to be average this summer, not extremely hot, not extremely dry. So that can help with the tree survival and growth. Stressed trees are more susceptible to diseases and pests. That's another thing that to look for, like going forward in the next year or two. You have stressed trees, maybe they don't look too bad, but then they get a disease or a pest that moves in, pest like some kind of insect, some kind of beetle that feasts on maybe Douglas fir or other trees. Then you can see like whole stands have damage or mortality because of that insect disease that moves in after a drought. Everyone should be monitoring their trees for stress the next couple years. Just in general, if you have a forest, you should be monitoring your trees, but just knowing that we had this heat wave and that drought and drier other years, it's good to just look, see what's going on with your trees. Now I wouldn't be so concerned if you have 1 or 2 trees that are thinning or even dying. But if you have multiple trees, like especially in like one area, that just seems like an abnormal amount of mortality or stress going on with your tree, then that's kind of where you should have some concern and maybe have somebody come out and take a look, see what's going on. Okay, I don't have this in this slide, but also I just want to like mention with your trees, like what you should be looking for is kind of the signs that we saw, besides from like the heat scorch, but just like thinning needles, dying tops, just the top's dead, but the rest of the tree looks fine. You've got your branches that are maybe dying off. Those are kind of the things you want to be looking at as health concerns, like on a several tree basis, or just a dead tree. So that's the conclusion of the heat dome portion. I am going to talk a little bit about Clark Conservation District. That's who me and Natalie are working for and who's putting on this presentation tonight. What is a conservation district? Conservation districts partner with private landowners to voluntarily take action to keep our soil and water healthy. They are trusted sources of natural resource expertise and funding, led and staffed by locals who understand the needs of the community that they serve. Clark CD is a special purpose district. We are non-regulatory and completely voluntary to work with. Here are some current programs that we offer. We have a watershed stewardship classes, free workshops and technical assistance site visits. So workshops similar to the one I'm putting on right now. We've got amphibian education workshops, which are a little more hands-on. We got our annual native plant sale. That goes on sale in early December, and then you get your plants in February. A whole bunch of native plants that you can plant in your own yard. Then we do farm site visits and project funds. So the site visit, I can do a site visit for you, especially if you have a bunch of trees that look like they're not doing well. I can come out there and visit and see what's going on and maybe help you out, give you some technical advice. But we also have funding for those kinds of funding for potential projects that you might have on your site to improve your land. And then farm equipment rental, we've got a manure spreader and poultry processing unit. So I think that might still be in the works. And then we have Poop Smart Clark, which is a program, I believe it's being focused on the East Fork of the Lewis to, improve your manure practices. But there's a bunch of funding there, or just site visits that can be done to help you out if you have livestock. And forestry, so that's what I do. I am the stewardship forester. I do free site visits to small forest landowners. See if you have questions, you want to improve something, you have some kind of project to run, or you just want to know what's going on with their trees, you need some help with something. And I do free forest management plans. And then we also have a fish barrier removal program, which is free culvert replacement on small forest landowner property, assuming you qualify and are selected. And this next slide shows a project that we helped fund. On the left, there is the before of a fish barrier. On the right is the bridge that we helped fund to get in place, and the technical advice that we gave to have that put in place. And on the left is what it used to look like with the undersized culvert, and on the right is what the stream now restored to a more natural flow looks like for fish to be able to get to their natural habitat. This slide just shows some references. I got the drought information from the US Drought Monitor. That there is the link to their website. Some of the information was from NOAA, and I got some of the pictures, the ones that I didn't take, from the University of NE Condition Monitoring Observer Reports, CMOR 2021, which you guys can access if you look up. They have like a kind of a observation data based on a map that you can go and say if you see drought conditions or things going on with your trees. Publicly reported. And then the last thing is the U.S. Forest Service Pacific Northwest Research Station. So the data on the growth on diameter of the trees. Would like to thank Connie Harrington for letting me use those slides that she and Richard Crone put together. And now this leads some time for questions. I got my contact information there at the bottom. I'm Mackenna Milosevich. That's my email address, and you can also give me a phone call if you want to set up a site visit or have questions about your trees.
Great, thank you, Mackenna. Yeah, and I've linked a few links in the chat. One to just see our general CD website where you can learn more about what we do. And then also I linked our Poop Smart Clark website. It's a new program we've been launching and working really hard on. So feel free to pay that website a visit. It looks like we have a few questions. I'll just remind everyone that you can put questions in the Q&A, and you can also put it in the chat. Some people have been putting some in the chat. So don't be afraid to chime in. And then I'm also going to link right now just a quick survey you all can take to let us know how we did. And it'll also provide you with some links so that you're up to date on when we offer more workshops and webinars like this one. And you can also sign up for a free site visit from Mackenna. So let's see, questions.
I'll start with the one from the chat, the suggestion
Okay,
on,
great.
We actually do have it in our plans to buy a, that's called a weed wrench. I don't know if we're getting one or two or whatever, that we will either rent out or just check out like library style to people who want to be. It's really good for Scotch broom as well as pulling European holly and other plants that you don't want. I don't know the full makeup of how that's going to work, but we are planning. It is in our plans to get those and have those available to the public.
Great. Yeah, it looks like we have another question. Can the stress from the drought account for the excessive branch breakage with the snow this year?
Can you ask that again?
Can the stress from the drought account for the excessive branch breakage from the snow this year?
It could have a potential effect. So maybe, I think most likely that late snow that we got in April, it was just kind of one after the usual time we get snow. So plants were already waking up. You have your buds started developing even if they didn't have new growth on them. When you have new growth in buds that aren't like hardened out for the winter, they can't hold snow the same way that a branch that's ready for winter time, that they're waking up for spring and ready to grow, not hold snow. So I think that's the main thing that caused all those branches in the April snow that we got breaking off. So if you saw extra breakage this winter, I think that was more because of how windy our how windy, mixed with the snow that was on branches, how windy is blowing branches out.
All right, another question. If we do have more extreme heat events in the future, are there tree varieties that you have seen that are more resilient?
So I can't speak to like scorch, but I can say that there are more drought tolerant trees. It's probably good that our area is so obsessed with planting Douglas fir for management, because Douglas fir is on the more drought tolerant. It's not super drought tolerant, but it's definitely more drought tolerant than similar trees like Western hemlock or Western red cedar. Let's see, what other ones we got? There's Western white pine. It's a pretty drought tolerant tree. It has other issues. So you need to make sure that you either get a seed source that is, can't remember the name. It's some sort of rust that tree gets on its branches that eventually leads to mortality. So you need to get a seed source that is resistant to that, or plan on trimming your tree pretty frequently to make sure it doesn't die. What other ones are there? There is the Pacific yew, not a great timber tree, but it is fairly drought tolerant, and a native tree that's not super common around here. And there are people looking into assisted migration, which is taking either seed sources trees here are typically the Longview or Clark County stock for like Douglas fir and other trees. There's a bunch of different names, but the trees you plant here are typically seed sourced from around this area. Assisted migration is looking at either getting like, Douglas fir from a little bit further south, planting it here, or looking at different species like the redwoods, like the coastal redwood or the giant sequoia, or even incense cedar, and planting that here. I wouldn't recommend planting a full stand of that, but maybe mixing it in with your trees. And biodiversity in general is always better, because a lot of insects and diseases will affect only one species. So if you have a drought event where your trees get weakened, and then an insect population comes in and all you have is Douglas fir and all they eat is Douglas fir, then you have no trees. But if you had a nice mixed stand of Douglas fir, Western hemlock, red cedar, white pine, and that Douglas fir insect, that like a Douglas fir beetle comes in, kills all your Douglas fir, you still got a bunch of trees left because you had a nice biodiverse stand.
Great. And it looks like someone put a local nursery in the chat that specializes in native and ornamental drought tolerant species and varieties. So if anyone's looking for some, check out that place. And it looks like we have someone with their hand raised. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute them and let them ask their question. It's Debbie. Hey, Debbie.
Hi, Debbie.
You're muted if you are talking. All right, well.
Maybe we'll get back to Debbie.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, let's see. So kind of along those same lines, is there anything people can do to protect the trees if another heat wave comes through?
I would say it depends on your situation. If you're like talking about your trees that are like near your house, in your yard, landscape trees, I would say water before, if a heat wave's coming. One of the main things that like goes on with a tree is that it gets so hot that it stops, it like shuts down its physiological processes with water. So if it has more water, it's going to more likely get through whatever it's going through, it's heat stress. Other than that, the only other thing that seemed to help with this situation is shade. So if you have like smaller trees, you can maybe try to create some shade for them, but otherwise just watering and planting the right trees in the right spot are kind of like your main thing. For forest stands, it's like planning, out 10 years ago or 20 years ago, 30 years ago, however long ago you planted your trees, planting the right trees so that they're as ready to get through any conditions that the climate throws at it.
All right, looks like we have another raised hand, so I will allow them to talk. Go ahead, Raj.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm from Victoria, BC, and our cedars in the backyards are, dying out. It seems to be some kind of drought,
Mhm.
I checked for some infection or some other reasons I didn't find, but it is becoming very common, in many places that it's cedars, they start dying from the top, from the needles, and halfway through, they hang on, then they start dying again, and they fall apart in the household or catch fire. Are you noticing something on your red cedars there also?
Yeah, so that is something that's been going on before the heat dome across Pacific Northwest, both Washington, Oregon on the west side of the Cascades. There is a decline in the western red cedar pretty much throughout its zone that it lives in. It's most likely correlated to heat and drought, but there's a lot of research going on it. I think there's a lot of funding for research to see what's going on with it too, but we don't know exactly what's going on. There's been no disease found, but yeah, it's been similar to what you guys have been seeing. Dying out tops, a lot of dead top cedars, especially here in Clark County after that heat dome. Dead top cedars or thinning needles or reddening, yellowing needles, just the cedar not looking good.
Yeah, the trouble is that we cannot cut these red cedars. You have to take permission, permit from the city, municipality. But, it's a long process. You have to pay $200, wait for 2 years. But, it's very cumbersome. So I thought that if they are going to die by natural causes, why not cut them? Why can't we cut them?
Yeah, well, I can't speak to what your guys' local regulations are. We have in Washington our own regulations around being able to cut and sell timber too, that can be pretty strenuous.
I have to pay $200 to cut that tree. It's there for 2 years. And condition is that they deposit that money, plant another tree, and if that other plant survives, you take $100 back. Next year, it survives, then they give you $200 back. If not, you lost your $200.
Oh man. Yeah, it must be really hard after a bad drought season.
Really kind of. You don't have anything like that there, no?
No, I don't. Not that I know of, at least in Clark County.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Raj.
Awesome, thanks. All right, a couple more questions. Are there any theories as to why the effect was harsher on the coast? Wasn't it cooler there?
There are some theories on why the coast got affected the way it did. It was cooler in comparison to us, like it wasn't as hot, but the coast in typical weather conditions is pretty mild. So whereas here we get hotter temperatures, we get up to 100 degrees. Out on the coast, it's usually 70 degrees. Doesn't matter, heat wave or not, it doesn't get much further from 60 to 70 degrees. It can get into 80s, but the fluctuation is a lot lower. So having such a high fluctuation affects the trees in comparison to what they're used to. And then they're looking into it. It's not really known yet, but there's some understanding and research on kind of the growth periods. So trees that are on the coast have a certain growth period. They start growing whenever the growing conditions are right. They're a lot different than over here, and then even more different as you go higher in elevation, just due to snow, frost amounts, and then how hot or cold it gets and how much water they get. the coast typically starts growing sooner than here. And so it's likely that they were in a different growth process or growth phase compared to trees over here that maybe made them more susceptible to that scorch. But then again, with that information we saw about the growth rate maybe wasn't as affected as much. So maybe it was just the needles got scorched on the outside, on the edges, and like wherever it was visible to the sun, but the growth wasn't that affected. So.
All right, moving on to our next question. Our larger, older madrone trees are dying this spring. No new growth and last year's leaves wilting. Some bottom branches are okay, but the tallest areas of most are dying. Is this related to heat?
Well, it's possible. Madrones kind of have like their own little niche that they can usually handle dry conditions, especially like they grow in like rock on the side of rock hillsides and that kind of thing. So they should be able to handle kind of drought, but maybe they can't handle the heat. They are kind of a more northern tree. You don't see them at this far south. So it's likely that that heat dome could have hurt them. I would say it's probably too soon to really tell if they're dead or not. I would, unless like you can scrape the bark off and see if the cambium's still moist, but that can also make it more likely your tree will die. So it's better to just wait it out and see how they do. It can maybe take a year. It might have a skip year on when putting out their leaves, but they might still be able to next year.
It's always so hard to give those types of answers because it's like we are still learning about the effects. So. All right, we have a comment from Jessica in the chat. Just an FYI, in one of the forests I work in, there is heavy Swiss needlecast and juvenile Doug fir from 1 year after planting to around 15 years after planting. And those trees lost 3 times more needles than in 2020. I expect many will die as they have few needles with which to photosynthesize. It may take a couple years though. The mature trees seem to have fared much better.
Thanks for the information. I have heard some areas have more damage from Swiss needlecast in Clark County than others, but yeah, it seems like they did not fare, this Swiss needlecast trees did not fare well with the heat. Thanks for the info, Jessica.
Yeah, that's some great info. Another question, is anyone looking at the impact of the heat dome on wildlife? I know this is kind of outside of your scope of.
Yeah, so I don't focus a lot on wildlife. I am just a forester. I don't know. I really don't know if, I mean, there's a lot of like people looking at wildlife based off of the fires that they had in 2020 in Oregon. So I imagine that that's on probably wildlife biologists looking and seeing how the heat dome did affect maybe populations or activity, that kind of thing.
All right, well, it looks like questions are starting to dwindle down. I'll give you all a chance, one last chance to submit any questions you may have. We've had a lot of great questions tonight, and Mackenna, thanks so much for answering these.
There is one thing in the comments, I'll just say, they said they use sheets and row color cloths and clips to shade small trees like red flowering currant, alpine spruce during the heat dome. Yeah, so shade, you can shade the smaller things. I mean, you're not going to go out and shade like a whole stand of trees, but like your tree plants that are smaller and in near your house or that are important to you, you can try shading out.
Someone just asked, would applying mulch help?
I mean, potentially it helps with moisture. I don't know if it'll help on just the scorch effect, but it should help with mortality.
Great. All right. Looks like people are starting to log off. We had someone join us from the East Coast tonight, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, welcome. And we had,
Welcome.
I think, a few people from Canada, so it's
Yeah,
great to see people.
far reaching. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming and for coming with such great questions. It's been nice to be joined virtually by you all. And this will be, as I said earlier, this will be posted, the recording will be posted. So if you would like to spread the word or rewatch, head to our website for that. And then just one final reminder that we do have the post-webinar survey. So if you have the time and you'd like to fill it out, we'd appreciate that a lot. And yeah, thanks again. Thanks, Mackenna, for giving this great talk, and hope to see you all back at a Clark CD webinar soon. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.